have this little gathering in your library for the next event, which I was excited to come up here just to attend. I'm not a part of it, from the Humanities Council. But I've been doing a Banned Books, Our Books Worth Reading tour across the state, banned in communities north, south, east, and west, and will continue to do so because thankfully, in many instances, there's been quite an interest, and it's been different libraries and bookstores have said, can you do one here, can you do one there? And the idea came to me back in February or March, I don't remember exactly when, as I kept reading and seeing more and more of the national situation being defined by folks in Florida and Texas around, you know, the horrible books that are in schools and the horrible books that are in libraries. And I was challenged by first the depictions of what was claimed to be horrible, but also the veracity of what books were really, quote, being given to children, and whether or not, and sort of what was the material of some of those books. So I've been reading some of them, not a ton of them. I've certainly been researching some, and they've folks who either know the books or others have told me about sort of what's really in the book when you hear one sentence or two sentences as opposed to the context.
Thank you.
Whether it's the graphic novels, a lot of them for young adults, and or the majority of the material of which, or I guess I should say the plurality, the two highest categories of books that are banned are either books that have racial history or racial circumstances and depict, sometimes it's atrocities against people of color, sometimes it's just racial history, slavery, and otherwise, and gender, and you know, situations of two same-sex partners, and so I've often asked, well, you know, some folks have lunged out in Facebook and other ways saying, you know, they're giving genderqueer to 5-year-olds. I said, really? Tell me what library, tell me what school, tell me where, and they never seem to respond with that information. And I point out that if people, libraries are the only source of finding of any books for some people who can't afford books or don't have a bookstore in their community, but they have a library, and so their access to information is only at the library, and that librarians, thank you, and school librarians and town librarians don't just throw books down people's, you know, gullets, but in fact find the book that is appropriate for the questions that the person is asking to find books about, and that for a lot of kids, sometimes seeing themselves in a book is a sense of belonging, and it's a sense of affirmation that who they are is perfectly reasonable, and we are all good people as who we are, and it actually decreases depression and suicide amongst kids of multiple different communities. But that I also talk about how banning books and erasing history or culture or different facets of our society is usually, in many other places, has been historically a precursor to a move towards authoritarianism and fascism, and that you know, we're at a precarious moment even in our own country with our own democracy, and so this push towards banning books and banning information should raise alarms for people, because the real question, one of the big questions, is who decides what books are banned? And depending on the audience or not, but I often give this example, and I give it because any community's school board or library's board of trustees meeting could well be approached by folks who might have a differing opinion and be pushing for a ban of this or that. And so I raise the question to anybody who wants to ban books. What if, for instance, a community was strongly majority not really comfortable with guns and gun violence, and said there should be no books in our library that depict guns and in anyone's hands, because if it has gun violence, that's promoting gun violence, and therefore there should be no books with guns. because that perspective could be the majority opinion in some places. Do we think those should be banned? And try to make sure folks maybe think about book banning and who's deciding that, you know, the coin can be flipped in many, many ways. And I know in one place there are folks who are bringing the Bible into meetings where other folks are pushing for bans on certain books, and they are taking certain passages and just reading those individual passages and saying, there's all kinds of things in this book that maybe if folks want to ban this other book because of this kind of material, they should also want to ban this book as well, as a means to sort of point out when you selectively choose material and you don't put it in the context of the rest of the book. Not that there's aspects of the Bible that I'm particularly happy about myself, but in any case, the story and the context of whatever is being talked about is also part of the material. And usually the banning is very limited. So I don't often talk as long at the beginning, but it's a fairly small group, so I just thought I'd give the full reasoning out there. And I thought there's no statewide official that I knew of who was really honing in on this topic, whether it be Vermont or elsewhere, to say not all people who hold statewide office think this way, and to try to just counter it a little bit in the way that we can. And it's been really great in communities all across the state. So typically, I then introduce other folks, including librarians. Sometimes it's authors of banned books. Sometimes it's members of affected communities who then read an excerpt from a book. And then I fill in with another book, depending on what topic is covered. And then we have a community for living room conversation. So please say whatever you wish.
Okay, well, Vermont has not one, not two, but 3 Children's Choice Awards, and in order to make myself a good librarian, I feel the need to read all of the nominees. Well, this was one, New Kid by Jerry Craft, and it says, middle school is hard enough without being the new kid. Now, nice, polite young man, he's also black. Parents decide he needs to go to a different school just for better opportunities. So he goes from his neighborhood, predominantly black, to this predominantly all white neighborhood. Obviously there are pulls and tugs and, you know, it can be an issue.
Code switching.
Truly. So here he is, he's getting ready for school. Basically, he's putting on a costume. So he's coming out, I am Batman! His neighbor's a freak. He's like, hey, the neighbors, fine, great. He's wearing his hoodie, got the shades on.
And this is a graphic novel, so
This
it's
is
sort of like
a graphic novel. Now, it's going to be
and-
hard to see from
Right.
here, but we have Jordan's tips for taking the bus. Because you don't just plop yourself on the bus going from one type of neighborhood to another. So, fitting in on the bus ride to school is hard work. I have to be like a chameleon. For example, in Washington Heights, I try to look tough. Inwood is a little different, so I can lose the hood. No one ever smiles in the morning, so you won't catch me doing that either. Kingsborough Bridge is where all of the public schools get off, so it's okay to take off my shades, so I can even draw. Last comes Riverdale, where I do my best not to look cool at all. No shades and definitely no hood. I don't even like to draw because people might think I'm going to use my markers to tag the bus. And here he is saying to the people on the bus, I love quadratic equations, don't you?
Oh my.
Man, by the time I get to school, I'm exhausted. That new kid, he's kind of cool, yet so non-threatening. Now, I read this book. It was a nominee back in the 2020-2021 school year I read it, I thoroughly enjoyed it. Texas and Pennsylvania, not so much. They thought that Jerry Craft was teaching critical race theory and made white students feel bad.
A college course.
I thought it was brilliant insight into what a young black man might be going through, being put into a new situation with different people, mostly of a different race. And the kid's good, he's just a good kid. Just a good boy. And a great story.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
What's to
so-
ban? What's to ban in this?
critical
Well,
race
it's-
theory.
it's-
How do you make that leap from that
All
story
people
to
do.
like a college-educated class?
Well, and it is interesting, there's that whole conversation around, it makes, my kid feel badly. And it's like, well, let's have a conversation about how you feel is from your own way of internalizing things.
Yes, it is.
If you don't portray certain behaviors or do certain acts that may be harmful to others, then you are not responsible for society's circumstance of the past or even of the present. What you do with that knowledge and how you act throughout your life, then you can choose later in life whether you're going to feel good about the things you've done or not.
This is true.
But reflect on your actions. So I have a couple different books that I tend to toggle between, depending. So I will not read from Beloved at this moment because we've had a book talking about some of the race issues and books that are sometimes banned because of conversations about race and just even depictions of history, which Beloved has quite about. Again, a Pulitzer Prize winning book has been banned in many places.
I've got a question. Aren't people aware that their feelings are under their control, not other people's?
Well, I think I can't speak for all the different people out there. And I suspect, I do think we all struggle sometimes with taking on feelings from circumstances that are out of our control or that we did not do. And it's something that we all evolve as we grow and age and learn to reflect on and say, wait a minute, I don't have to put that burden on my shoulders, in terms of I didn't perform that act. If anything, I could step in and help with the circumstance. But
It's, I don't know, just adults. I can understand children.
Right.
right.
But even the
that's
children-
part of being mature is to realize that you
Yeah.
have you're responsible for your own feelings and no one can make you feel any way,
Right. That's
you know,
right.
Right.
one way or another, if you know yourself.
Well, that right fragility leads to statements like, slaves got like skills. But even with children, if they should feel like bad, that's an opportunity for empathy. And a good
Absolutely.
parent or a good adult or a good teacher or a good librarian is going to capitalize on that and take them deeper, and they'll come out the other side and feel empathy. And it's a good opportunity because, of course, everyone has to work through that like awful feeling of like this was done. But you have to understand that just because you have mitochondrial DNA from something doesn't mean you're responsible for it. And you're right, people are responsible for their own white fragility. You can get over it, and do the work and come out the other side.
Or it doesn't
But I
happen-
think it's
yeah.
this, just, we're gonna destroy ourselves we don't need Al-Qaeda, ISIS, or Daesh. We just are gonna do it ourselves through our own polarized nation. And this is an example of it, this kind of stuff of banning books. It's a tool in the belt of driving wedges between ourselves, and we can't allow it. We have to build bridges.
It's a pity because these books, they make such good discussion
Of
starters.
course.
Well, absolutely. And I think that's part of the key about this as well is not everybody is in the same place
No.
as far as sort of where they're at with how they deal with their feelings, right? And if we can help folks explore how to address how they react to things and how they put it on themselves and carry burdens that they don't need to carry
That's right.
in terms of those pains. That I think is where we can make some progress. I mean, I'm often asked as a political figure, how do you talk to those people or how do you listen to those people?
Those people.
And
Wow,
I point out like I don't view anybody as a category in that way. And And I also have always said, and I think it's really important to meet people, try to meet people closer to where they are than where you want them to be. And listen, and then find a path to where you can start to communicate about maybe the difficult things after you've found some other things to talk about that are not so difficult.
It's taking responsibility to not be othered. I moved here from Chittenden County, and I had to meet a lot of new people. And I did this any one time someone tried to polarize me or put me in a category. And I built some great bridges, and I would say there's about 7 people that wanted to other me that would just come to my rescue if I was a damsel of distress, if you will. So you can't put people into categories and other people, but we have to take responsibility for not being othered. When people put the bait on the hook, you can't take the bait. And you have to take responsibility for not pulling yourself into the duality when they try to bait, if anyone tries to bait you. And you just say, stop, let's build a bridge, get to know me for who I am and not for what you think I am.
Yeah. So a book that I often read from, and it's actually, I tend to read the whole thing because it's pretty quick,
Sweet.
is a book called Tango Mak 3. Have you heard of this book?
I've heard it, but I don't have little ones in my life anymore, so.
So this is based on a true story in the New York Zoo. And it's about a couple of penguins in the zoo. So I will read it briefly, and then of course my farm fingers don't always pull apart the pages very well. Titled Tango Mak 3 by Justin Richardson and Peter Parnell, and illustrated by Henry Cole. So little pictures of the zoo, or park. So in the middle of New York City, these are from farther away, so it's going to be easier to take them off. In the middle of New York City, there's a great big park called Central Park. Children love to play there. It has a toy boat pond where they can sail their boats. It has a carousel to ride on in the summer, and an ice rink to skate on in the winter. Best of all, it has its very own zoo. Every day, families of all kinds go to visit the animals that live there. But children and their parents aren't the only families at the zoo. The animals make families of their own. There are red panda bear families with mothers and fathers and furry red panda bear cubs. There are monkey dads and monkey moms raising noisy monkey babies. And there are toad families and toucan families and cotton top tamarin families too. And in the penguin house, there are penguin families. Every year at the very same time, the girl penguins start noticing the boy penguins, and the boy penguins start noticing the girls. When the right girl and the right boy find each other, they become a couple. 2 penguins in the penguin house were a little bit different. One was named Roy, and the other was named Silo. Roy and Silo were both boys, but they did everything together. They bowed to each other, and they walked together, they sang to each other, and they swam together, and wherever Roy went, Silo went too. They didn't spend much time with the girl penguins, and the girl penguins didn't spend much time with them. Instead, Roy and Silo wound their necks around each other, and their keeper, Mr. Gramsci, noticed the 2 penguins and thought to himself, they must be in love. Roy and Silo watched how the other penguins made a home, so they built a nest of stones for themselves. Every night, Roy and Silo slept there together, just like the other penguin couples. And every morning, Roy and Silo woke up together, but one day, Roy and Silo saw that the other couples could do something they could not. The mama penguin would lay an egg. She and the papa penguin would take turns keeping the egg warm until finally it would hatch. And then there would be a baby penguin. Sorry, fingers.
I have to do the same thing as story time.
Roy and Silo had no egg to sit on and keep warm. They had no baby chick to feed and cuddle and love. Their nest was nice, but it was all empty. One day, Roy found something that looked like what the other penguins were hatching, and he brought it to their nest. It was only a rock. But Silo carefully sat on it, and sat, and sat. And when Silo got sleepy, he slept, and when Silo was done sleeping and sitting, he swam, and Roy sat. And day after day, Silo and Roy sat on the rock. But nothing happened. Then, Mr. Gramsci got an idea. He found an egg that needed to be cared for, and he brought it to Roy and Silo's nest. Roy and Silo knew just what to do. They moved the egg to the center of their nest, and every day they turned it so each side stayed warm. Some days, Roy sat while Silo went for food, and other days it was Silo's turn to take care of the egg. They sat in the morning and they sat at night. They sat through lunchtime and swim time and supper. They sat at the beginning of the month, and they sat at the end of the month, and they sat all of the days in between. Until one day, they heard a sound coming from inside the egg. Peep, 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 it said. And Roy and Silo called back. Squawk, squawk, peep, peep, answered the egg. Suddenly, a tiny hole appeared and in the eggshell, and then, crack! Out came their very own baby. She had fuzzy white feathers and a funny black beak. Now, Roy and Silo were fathers. We'll call her Tango, Mr. Gramsay decided, because it takes two to make a tango. Roy and Silo taught Tango how to sing for them when she was hungry. They fed her food from their beaks. They snuggled her in their nest at night. Tango was the very first penguin in the zoo to have two daddies. Soon, Tango grew strong enough to leave the nest. Roy and Silo took her for a swim, just like all the other penguin families. And all the children who came to the zoo could see Tango and her two fathers playing in the penguin house with the other penguins. Hooray, Roy! Hooray, Silo! Welcome, Tango, they cheered. At night, the three penguins returned to their nest. There they snuggled together, and like all the other penguins in the penguin house, and all the other animals in the zoo, and all the families in the big city around them, they went to sleep. And that's the book.
My heart.
And this book has also been banned, just for depicting two parents of the same sex.
How widely?
It's one of the top 20 or 30 books banned in the country, actually. And I think in part, the folks who are pushing to ban it, and I don't know the exact statistic, is because it's a younger children's book. So there are some who say, a certain age should never see certain things. And it's like, well, this is a true story, perfectly natural. And as is all the true stories for all of us. And I one of the readings had someone say, well, I'm okay with that book, but there are other books, young adult books that are, what is it called, the cartoon, what's the style?
Graphic novels.
Graphic novels.
Graphic novels.
Thank
So
you. My
popular.
brain, yeah, very popular right now.
In the early days.
Right. And they said, well, that's not appropriate for 5-year-olds. And I asked them, when have you ever heard of that book specifically being given to a 5-year-old in a school?
Thank
And
you.
this is where the librarians and teachers who are trained and wise individuals, it's not the depiction that's being put out there of, certain books with certain intimacy acts are being given to, 4 and 5-year-olds. No, that's really not happening. This is for, 4 and 5 and 6-year-olds. And so they do these bans and put these strict parameters on. And one of the issues there is, some folks say, well, that shouldn't be in elementary school. Well, different kids have different levels of maturity at 5th grade, 7th grade,
True.
8th grade. And when we make a government line in the sand, it actually doesn't allow for the variations of all of us in society of when we mature, whether it's physically or mentally. I can laugh at myself. I was 5'5" when I finished high school. I matured much later. And it wouldn't have changed my mind about any number of things with certain books and certain readings, but that limitation is really not trusting librarians and teachers to do what they've been trained to do. And it goes back to, again, who decides and who draws the line with what material. And I was asked in one situation, well, what about this book? And I said, the problem is, it goes always back over and over again to who decides. And when you go down that path, you have to say there is no line to cross. You don't ban books. And librarians don't stock every book that exists in their libraries. First of all, you couldn't, as far as I know.
A, don't have the budget. B,
Don't
don't have the shelf space.
Exactly.
Not gonna happen. Can't do it.
And and you also stock books in certain categories, from a kid's room to a young adult section to fiction and nonfiction,
Absolutely.
probably murder novels to whatever novels, right? Romance. So those are some of the. Yeah.
I think it's
Whoops.
it's the emotion behind the person reading it as to who decides. So we hear that, we're open-minded and we think it's beautiful, but someone else reads that story and they're in a rage, and their rage builds as they read the story because their lens that they're looking at it through is already a rage-filled place. And I'm just so glad that any attention that can be drawn to it. Ari Velshi on MSNBC has a spot that he does on banned books. Of course, right now he's in Israel, because let's pray there's no World War III. But yeah, no, any spotlight, and so I'm glad you're putting this lens on it, and it's,
Yeah.
you know,
Well,
so
I was just gonna
incredible
say,
topic.
I think about the kids in elementary school who have two male parents.
That's
right.
Who have two
It
female
happens.
parents. They hear this book and it's a validation.
That's right.
And then I think
Absolutely.
about the kids in their elementary school class with them who have a mother and father, who have traditional parents, but they know kids who they see that they have two male parents or two female parents, and they're they want to know what that's about. So this makes it an easy way to talk about it.
Yeah, a
And they're
lot.
gonna ask questions, kids ask questions.
Absolutely, they do.
Well,
Wait,
we have teachers in our schools who have same-sex partners.
Yeah.
And they have children.
Yes, of course.
You know, it's, I mean,
Well, and I ask anyone who wants to ban a book, have they taken the computer, whether it's the pocket computer that's sort of like a phone, or the desk computer, and unplugged it and made it inaccessible to their kid? Because the other thing about these books, and many that do depict various intimacy, including some not mutually consenting scenarios, but they're teaching in those books some information about mutual consent. That if they don't want them to read those books or have access to that material, they better turn these off. Because what they're going to find on this when they go looking for it, unfiltered by a librarian or a teacher, is far more violent and or far less consensual, far less equality of partnership. And so they're going to see it, they're going to find it, they're going to hopefully not experience it, but what they're going to learn in these books, in the full context of these books, is far more healthy in the long run than anything
think
they're going to
so.
find on these.
But they can stumble
pales in
upon it.
comparison.
Right, right. Well, thank you for
Thank
joining
you.
us for a bit.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Bye-bye.
please reach out to my office if you have any further questions. Yeah, absolutely.
but, and also, the more you tell a child not to read a book, you think
Right.
they say, I shouldn't
Yeah.
read that. Yeah, right.
Exactly.
You're dreaming.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Although,
And it has, I mean, I've got some authors who have read with us, and they say, you know,
Yeah.
for a few folks, if a certain few books become well-known as banned books, they may end up with a more positive outcome as far as sales or readership. But for a lot of the
The irony.
authors who are much less well-known,
right,
it has been devastating
absolutely.
that their book gets us. And the other thing, and you may be able to speak to this as a librarian, is if librarians in certain communities feel like they're more likely to be attacked at a library board meeting.
Oh, there's always
or
that soft
whatnot,
censor.
That the soft
I'm
censorship.
going,
Can you talk
okay.
about that?
Here's what I have to spend. It's, okay, I have this and this. I think people might like this, but this one might be is my job is this book worth losing my job over?
Right,
I have to ask myself that.
right,
I shouldn't have to,
No, you shouldn't.
but I do.
right. And you're not the only one, I think.
Oh, no.
And it's not a short leap from there to like my 3 adult children last summer. My son flew in from Portland, Oregon, and the girls sat me down and they were like, we don't want you to run for anything because someone will shoot you. You're the type that you'll piss somebody off. I go, well, they never asked me for anything, so I will say yes to this. And then right after that, I got asked to run. So I said, no, it's a hard no. A promise is a promise. But that's so sad that we have a world where we have to think of all these
It's a sad
factors.
world out there.
And I'm like, what? How did we fall down this rabbit hole?
Well, it's a sad world in a lot of ways. And right now, there's a lot of heaviness around some of these
There
things.
is.
there's a lot of aspects of life that we've made progress in this regard as well. You know, in terms of running for office or being in certain identities, whether it's race, gender, or otherwise, there's still horrible injustices occurring. But as we also look through history here, or unfortunately present in some parts of the world where it's become quite embroiled at the moment, there are and were some situations that were quite a bit worse. You know, we are still, as we often focus on the challenges and the negatives, and we
True.
should be aware of them, and we should be working to address
Guilty.
them, and we'll continue to do so. But we sometimes fail to see a lot of the progress that's also been made,
True.
and it doesn't mean we should stop with the progress we've had. There's
No.
more work to do, but I try not to get too down on the negatives, because I do think there's certainly aspects of people's lives that are much more open
True.
and free today than they used to be, at least in some places. But we have to keep fighting.
Don't you think there's always been people that will want to choose what you read? I remember I was 14 years old, I was in the hospital to have my tonsils out, and I brought a library book with me, oh, shocker. I brought Go Ask Alice about a teen drug addict, the diary, and the nurse said to me, does your mother know you're reading that? To which Smarty Pants me replied, my mother lets me read anything. So it's not really a new concept of
Right,
wanting to put reins on what others read,
right.
but it did not turn me into a drug addict. I've tried pot 3 times and it put me to sleep. I said, well, this isn't for me, I'm done.
Right.
So a book isn't going to do that to you.
If anything, not, as you brought up earlier, not seeing depictions of anybody else like you will lead you down a path of isolation and potentially drug or alcohol or other substance abuse. I mean, the rate of youth depression and suicide amongst often marginalized communities is quite high, unfortunately. And just seeing yourself or seeing someone like you in a book, in a healthy situation, can honestly often save those kids'
It's
lives.
empowering.
Absolutely. You know, I got my degree to be a therapist and counselor, social worker, in a time where it was unheard of to have a peer counselor be certified and accepted. And I remember when it all started happening that it got accepted. And now it's proven that's very quickly, now talk about progress, that someone who probably is a trans person would be the trans therapist, for example, just to pull that out of my hat as an example. And there was a time where this peer advocate won a state award, and I was so excited. The only reason I knew about it because I was a finalist, but I didn't get it, and I was glad she got it. And so that is an example of the positiveness.
Right.
But I can't help but feel also cynically optimistic at the same time, because I fought for a lot of rights in the 70s, and we have less rights than
Well,
we did
no
then.
doubt, no
and,
doubt.
And I'm glad I live in Vermont, where my daughters have choice still, and that they could read a book about it if they needed to when they were younger. But
I fear
No,
for my
that one's-
grandnieces who are in
that's
their
been a huge
20s.
step backwards.
I fear for them.
The who?
My grandnieces
Right.
who are
Yeah.
in their 20s.
Right?
you feel like you're not leaving the world in a better place.
No.
I also think we're gonna have a huge, whatever the opposite of backlash is, that
We
it's,
tend to go
it's made
pendulum.
people
like,
aware of the rights that they took for granted and how you have to participate in order to keep them.
Yeah.
So I feel like there is some positive things that are gonna come out of that.
I'm hoping.
Well, I mean, you even look at Vermont's vote on that constitutional amendment, and it was 73%. You know, that's that was higher than I think even the advocates thought it would be in terms of the line in the sand on this issue, but of reproductive liberty and freedom. And it'll be interesting to see. You know, we saw some backlash in recent elections, and we'll see what happens in elections going forward around
Indeed.
some of this. I was just hearing about, well, you saw in Ohio, there is a constitutional amendment coming up in November on reproductive liberty, and in Ohio it's a 50% threshold. And the legislature, once they saw that was coming, in this last legislative session, moved a vote in the summer
I saw
to
that.
change the threshold to 60% in order to try to defeat
It didn't
the
work.
ability for the amendment to pass, and people were savvy enough to come out that they crushed that last minute attempt by the folks in power to change the rules midstream. So
Kept their eye on the prize.
Right,
yeah,
yeah.
and so those kinds of things give me hope in areas where the politics had been moving in a different direction. And it's not even just the politics; it's sort of the social sentiment. Because to me, that worries me more than politics. Because the politics will ultimately follow social sentiment. There are people that try to manipulate what the social sentiment is, and that's part of also interesting information. So there's a board up there with well over 1,000 titles that have been challenged or banned.
It breaks my heart.
And it's from PEN America, but also for anybody who might be watching, the American Library Association, ALA.org has a lot of information on banned books and what's happening and which books and why and sort of what's happening across the country. And they're helping legally fight back on some of these battles, although in some communities, the library boards or the schools or the select boards are actually withdrawing the membership of those libraries from the ALA, the American Library Association, to try to weaken the ALA. And so that's something that people should be aware of as well.
Yeah.
Language gerrymandering and all the rest.
Well, it's important to keep an eye on it. And yeah, any other
And-
thoughts or questions?
Yeah, well, there is progress. You just have to know where to sort of notice. I mean, when civil unions was first brought up in Vermont, there was huge split among people.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it was big deal, all the billboards and signs and hate and meetings full of rancor. And then civil unions passed and marriage equality passed, and there are still some people out there.
Fast.
But
It's like
pretty
dominoes.
much everybody's now understands and now knows somebody who's gay, and it's become really not an issue
Right.
very quickly. And-
For most people, I know some people,
Yeah, well,
But then it's-
there will always be,
I
but,
choose to not even bring up the subject with them because I know it's just not going to go well.
but at the time, you thought that that's
Who's
how
gonna
it
split
was
the state in
always going
half?
to be.
Who's going to split the state in half?
True.
Yeah. And now it's like,
There was
Yeah.
a little bit of political backlash, and then it recovered quickly, and then it spread through the country like dominoes, and
Right.
I think it was Mass that made it legal, and just all over the country. And it went quickly.
yeah,
People were not, and this is like, abortion is the same way, people are not gonna be told what they feel about these key issues.
Yeah.
And that helps me, because what surprises me the most is the people that wanna ban books are the very people that surprise me, that we have so many people that would be in a cult. And let's face it, this political system is like a cult. And I know that there's people in my life that I've seen, relatives, that are gonna need deprogramming, because they fell down a rabbit hole of disinformation, misinformation, and deliberate.
Well, that's why when they go
So
online,
to have things that are for kids to be able to just get common sense stuff, how can we compare it to the wild world that you say that is out there that they're gonna just tap into?
well, and that's why when people post on my page, whether it's my personal page, my political campaign, political page, my campaign page, my official page, whatever page it is, various disinformation. Oh, they're giving this book to 5-year-olds. I say, name the school.
Yeah.
Thank
Anywhere in
you.
the country,
Thank
name
you.
the school. And they don't have it because they learn it, they're
No
getting programs like
information.
you said.
No information,
Um,
disinformation.
And I don't do it in a way, I don't believe I do it in a way that says, you're an idiot or you're wrong or whatnot.
That
Because that
fixes
doesn't
nothing.
get us
That
anywhere.
doesn't help.
So just trying
Changes
to have
nothing.
the conversation,
No.
tell me where, you know,
Mhm.
because I don't think that kid should probably, 5-year-olds should probably see that book.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah,
Just like
exactly.
the librarians and the teachers, and so
That's
it's
right.
not
Absolutely.
a classroom reading, in a kindergarten class or a first grade class.
Let me say, you librarians have been there, member of the Patriot Act and everything. You librarians
That-
were on the front line.
Yeah.
You stood there between us and, you librarians, unsung heroes of our fabric of our culture.
Rascally little
Yes,
rebels.
and she plucks weeds.
And we
but she-
like it.
That's right.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.